Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. The sun is streaming through your window. You can hear the birds outside, maybe the faint hum of traffic, right?
Yeah, totally normal morning.
Exactly. And your mind is perfectly sharp. Your thoughts are racing. You decide it's time to get up and start your day. But when you try to push the blankets off, nothing happens.
Oh, wow.
You try to turn your head, nothing. You try to open your mouth to call out for help, and it's just silence.
Yeah.
You are completely agonizingly aware of every single detail in the room around you, but you cannot move a single muscle to tell anyone you are actually awake.
Which is, it's a scenario that strikes at our absolute deepest fears about autonomy, just being entirely conscious, receiving all that sensory input from the world, but having absolutely no output mechanism.
Right. And today we are taking a deep dive into the fact that this isn't just a terrifying thought experiment. It is a very real, incredibly rare medical condition known as locked-in syndrome, or LIS.
Yeah, it's a profound topic.
It really is. We are pulling from a really fascinating stack of medical data, historical records, and deeply personal biographical accounts to understand what is actually happening inside the body when this occurs.
And it's a condition that fundamentally forces us to, separate the mind from the body. It makes you question what consciousness actually is when it's totally stripped of movement.
So our mission today is to unpack the terrifying medical reality of this pseudo-coma, the staggering historical coincidences surrounding its discovery, and honestly, the profound resilience of the human spirit. If you're listening right now, get ready, because this deep dive is going to challenge basically everything you assume about communication, about your own physical body, and ultimately about what truly makes a life worth living.
Absolutely. And to anchor us in what this actually feels like for a human being, we really should start with the person who brought this condition out of the medical journals and into the public eye.
Right. Jean-Dominique Bauby, his personal account remains sort of the definitive window into the experience of locked-in syndrome.
Yeah, his story is just incredible.
Based on the biographical sources we reviewed, Bauby's life before the condition was just incredibly vibrant. It's in 1995, he's 43 years old, and he's the glamorous editor-in-chief of the French lifestyle magazine ALA.
Right. Very high profile.
Exactly. He is wealthy, attending high society parties, raising a family, and then on December 8th, everything just stops. What actually happened to him medically that day?
So Bauby suffered a massive stroke, but it wasn't in the upper regions of the brain where, our thoughts and personality reside. It was lower down, deep within the brainstem.
Okay.
And this stroke caused him to lose consciousness completely and slip into a coma for 20 days.
And when he woke up, he realized he was paralyzed from head to toe. The sources note that the only voluntary movement he retained in his entire body, like his whole body, was the ability to blink his left eye.
Just the left eye.
Because his right eye actually had to be sewn shut due to irritation, leaving him with literally a single eyelid as his only interface with the outside world.
Yeah. Speech, limb movement, even the ability to swallow all of it just vanished. Yet his cognitive functions, his memory, his personality, they were entirely unaffected.
The fact that he used that one moving eye to dictate an entire 130-page book is just staggering to me. It's called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. He worked with a ghostwriter who would recite a specialized alphabet.
Right, and it wasn't just A, B, C, D.
No, his speech therapist arranged the letters based on how frequently they are used in the French language, just to make it as efficient as possible.
So the ghostwriter would read the letters aloud, like E, S, A, R, I, and Bauby would just blink when she reached the correct one. And they built words, then sentences, then paragraphs.
And it required 200,000 blinks, 2 months of working 3 hours a day. And the title just perfectly captures his reality, I think. His mind was free to roam his memories and imagination like a butterfly, but his physical body was this rigid, inescapable metal cage dragging him down like a diving bell.
It's a haunting metaphor, but so accurate.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to me, it sounds like having a massive state-of-the-art computer server like your brain that works perfectly, and a network of computers, your muscles, that also work perfectly. But the single fiber optic cable connecting them has just been slashed. Medically speaking, what actually builds that diving bell?
What's fascinating here is the sheer microscopic precision of the damage required to cause this. To understand your severed fiber optic cable analogy, we have to look closely at the brainstem.
Right.
It is a small, stalk-like structure right at the base of your skull, and it serves as the exclusive bridge connecting your cerebrum, where all your conscious thoughts live down to your spinal cord, which then distributes those commands to your body.
So every single signal has to pass through this one tiny bottleneck.
Every single one, yeah. And the brainstem itself is divided into three sections. You have the midbrain at the top, the pons in the middle, and the medulla oblongata at the bottom.
Okay, midbrain, pons, medulla.
Exactly. And locked-in syndrome is almost exclusively caused by localized damage to the anterior part of the pons. When a stroke destroys that specific tissue, it essentially detonates the bridge. The electrical signals generated by your conscious mind simply hit a dead end.
But I'm trying to wrap my head around why Bauby could still blink then. If the bridge is totally blown up at the pons, how did that one specific signal for his eyelid get through?
That is the defining anatomical quirk of locked-in syndrome. The cranial nerves responsible for vertical eye movement and blinking actually originate higher up, in the midbrain, just above the pons.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so those specific nerve pathways bypass the site of the damage entirely. The conscious mind can still send a signal down to the eyes, but every single pathway heading below the eyes is disconnected.
Wow. Knowing that the mind is fully awake behind those eyes makes the initial hospital experience sound like an absolute living nightmare. If the physical body is completely disconnected, how do doctors even know the server is still turned on? The data we reviewed shows it takes an average of 75 days to accurately diagnose locked-in syndrome.
And that 2.5-month gap is just a profound systemic challenge. I mean, to an examiner walking into the room, a patient who cannot move, speak, or show any facial expressions appears deeply unconscious.
Right.
Unless the medical staff knows to ask the patient to look up or down, those vertical eye movements are easily missed, or they're just dismissed as involuntary spasms.
That means a patient could spend 75 days listening to their family cry at their bedside, understanding every single word of their grim prognosis, without any ability to scream out that they're still inside.
It's terrifying to even think about.
The sources listed a bunch of misdiagnoses that happened during this gap, and honestly, they kind of blur together for me. They mentioned coma, unresponsive wakefulness syndrome, and akinetic mutism. Wait. If a patient's cognition is intact in akinetic mutism, how is that different from being locked in?
It really comes down to the origin of the immobility. In locked-in syndrome, the patient desperately wants to move, but physically cannot because the connection is severed at the brainstem.
Because the bridge is out.
Right. But in akinetic mutism, the damage is typically in the frontal lobe of the brain. The physical pathways to the muscles are actually entirely intact, but the patient has lost the psychological will or the drive to move or speak.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they are conscious, but the impulse to act is fundamentally absent.
So they aren't trapped in the same frantic way that a locked-in patient is. And unresponsive wakefulness syndrome, which used to be called a vegetative state, that means the conscious mind really isn't there, even if their eyes open randomly.
Correct. And distinguishing between these states requires an EEG, an electroencephalogram, to map the electrical activity of the brain. If you see complex, highly reactive brain waves in a paralyzed patient, you know you are dealing with locked-in syndrome.
The delay in getting those brain scans can lead to unimaginable situations. The case of the Belgian man, Ram Houben, just floored me.
Oh yeah, that case is unbelievable.
In 1983, he was in a severe car crash and was presumed to be in a vegetative state. The sources say his conscious state wasn't discovered until a brain scan in 2006. That is 23 years of full awareness trapped inside his own mind.
His case represents, the extreme end of the diagnostic nightmare.
But the part that I really struggled with in the sources was what happened after he was diagnosed. He supposedly started communicating, but the medical community immediately compared his communication method to a Ouija board, and they cast massive doubt on it.
Yeah, that became hugely controversial.
Wait, so for 23 years, Ram Houben was awake, and when he finally gets a chance to talk, doctors say his helper is faking it. How do they justify taking his voice away again?
Well, the controversy stems from the specific method used, which is called facilitated communication. In this practice, a helper physically supports the nonverbal patient's hand, basically guiding their index finger over a keyboard.
Which sounds helpful if your muscles are extremely weak.
It does, but major medical and psychological organizations strongly reject its validity due to what's known as the ideomotor effect.
The ideomotor effect.
Yes. The clinical consensus is that the facilitator, often a very well-meaning caregiver, unconsciously guides the patient's hand to the letters they expect to see. Just like participants in a seance unconsciously move the planchette on a Ouija board, the facilitator is likely generating the message, not the patient.
Just seems incredibly cruel to cast doubt on it after he waited 2 decades to be noticed.
It is a devastating reality of the condition. But medical professionals have a strict ethical obligation to ensure that the patient's true voice is being heard, rather than projecting a caregiver's thoughts onto them. It just underscores how intensely fragile communication becomes when the physical mechanism is stripped away.
Because spotting this condition is so complex and requires advanced brain scans, the medical establishment actually missed it for a long time. The very first accurate descriptions of locked-in syndrome didn't come from neurologists or medical textbooks. They actually came from novelists.
It remains one of the most striking overlaps of art and science, I think. Decades before we had the clinical vocabulary, writers were observing and diagnosing this precise state of being.
Alexandre Dumas described it perfectly in The Count of Monte Cristo. He features a character, Monsieur Noirtier de Villefort, who survives a stroke but is left completely paralyzed, communicating only by blinking. Dumas vividly describes him as a corpse with living eyes.
And Émile Zola also captured the horror of it in his novel Thérèse Raquin, writing about a character who is buried alive in a dead body.
The irony in the source material regarding Dumas just blew my mind. Before Jean-Dominique Bauby suffered his massive stroke, he was actively negotiating with his publisher to write a modernized, contemporary adaptation of The Count of Monte Cristo.
Oh.
Yeah, he was going to rewrite the exact book that prophesied his own ultra-rare fate.
That is just an eerie coincidence. And the clinical history took much longer to catch up to the literature. The first formal medical case wasn't presented until 1875 by a hospital intern in Paris named Camille Darlet. And the term itself, locked-in syndrome, wasn't coined until 1966 by two American neurologists, Fred Plum and Jerome B. Posner.
1966 feels incredibly recent for such a profound condition. I mean, Plum and Posner gave doctors the diagnostic tools to spot this, but I'm still stuck on why giving it a medical definition changed the actual day-to-day treatment for the people in those hospital beds.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Plum and Posner didn't just provide a label, they radically reframed the medical ethics surrounding these patients. Prior to 1966, an immobile patient was often treated as an insensate object. Plum and Posner explicitly mandated that because these individuals have fully intact cognition, doctors and nurses must treat them as fully awake human beings.
Oh, so they forced the medical staff to speak with the patient, not talk about them while standing over the bed.
Precisely. They recognized that the psychological torture of being ignored was entirely avoidable. They demanded a high index of suspicion from examining physicians, urging them to actively search for those vertical eye movements.
Okay, so we know how it's identified, but how does a healthy 43-year-old like Bauby just suddenly get their brainstem severed?
Well, the overarching data on triggers comes from a comprehensive 1986 study by Paddleson and Growar, alongside more modern data from the French Association of Locked-In Syndrome, or ALS. And the vast majority of cases, between 76% and 86%, are vascular.
Meaning a stroke. A clot blocks the blood, or a blood vessel ruptures directly in the pons.
Yes. The brain tissue is starved of oxygen, resulting in an infarction or localized tissue death. The second most common trigger is traumatic brain injury, accounting for roughly 14%. Basically, a severe physical impact that shears or damages the pathways in the brainstem.
But the sources also highlight some absolute outliers. Cases triggered by meningitis or cancer metastasis, where a tumor spreads specifically to the brainstem, heroin abuse, diazepam toxicity, and incredibly, there's a documented case caused by eating pufferfish.
Right, because pufferfish contain tetrodotoxin, which is a remarkably potent neurotoxin. It works by blocking the sodium channels in the nervous system.
Okay.
And when those channels are blocked, the nerves simply cannot send the electrical impulses required to trigger muscle contractions. It results in a rapid, complete paralysis of the voluntary muscles, but it entirely spares the brain's cognitive centers.
I imagine listeners are wondering about the odds here. If you suffer a brainstem stroke versus ingesting a neurotoxin or getting into a car crash, does that underlying cause change your chances of escaping the paralysis?
It significantly alters the prognosis, actually. Strangely enough, the non-vascular causes like trauma or toxins present a much better chance of recovering some motor function than strokes do.
Why would a physical trauma be easier to recover from than a clot?
Because a stroke fundamentally destroys the vascular infrastructure. The tissue in the pons actually dies and turns into a fluid-filled cavity. But physical trauma or a toxin might just interrupt the nerve signals or cause temporary swelling that compresses the nerves without permanently killing the surrounding tissue. If the swelling goes down or the toxin is metabolized, the pathways can sometimes reestablish themselves.
But the overall survival numbers are still really daunting.
Yeah, the Patterson and Growar study outlined a 60% mortality rate. And the timing is critical here. 88% of those deaths occur within the first 4 months of onset.
Wait, if the brainstem damage is isolated, what is actually causing that high mortality rate?
By a very wide margin, the leading cause of death is pneumonia.
Because of the paralysis.
Yeah.
They can't swallow or clear their airways?
Yes, exactly. The inability to swallow means oral secretions or food particles can easily slip past the vocal cords and enter the lungs, which causes aspiration pneumonia. Combine that with the prolonged need for intubation and mechanical ventilation, and the risk of severe respiratory infection just skyrockets.
So if someone survived that initial 4-month window of vulnerability, when the pneumonia risk stabilizes, what does life actually look like on day 150 or year 5? This leads us to a profoundly complex intersection of medical ethics, mental resilience, and modern technology.
It really is an area defined by deeply opposing personal experiences, and it forces us to look at the very subjective nature of suffering.
We have to look at the right to die debate, which the sources highlight through the case of Tony Nicholson in the United Kingdom. He developed locked-in syndrome following a stroke and was highly vocal about his reality, explicitly calling his life a living nightmare. He fought a massive legal battle for the right to assisted euthanasia, taking his appeal all the way to the UK's Supreme Court.
The court ultimately dismissed his case in 2014, although he had already passed away from pneumonia 2 years prior. But his legal battle brought international attention to the sheer despair that can accompany this condition.
Yet the sources present a massive counter-narrative that I honestly did not expect. The ALS organization surveyed 65 patients living long-term with locked-in syndrome. The results were just astounding. 70% of those surveyed had recovered some degree of limb movement over the years. But the statistic that truly stopped me, 72% of these patients self-described as happy. Only 7% indicated a desire to end their lives.
This raises an important question. How do we accurately measure quality of life? Healthy individuals often project their own fear onto profound physical disability, assuming it automatically equates to endless misery. But that 72% happiness statistic fundamentally challenges our assumptions about human adaptability and finding meaning in a radically altered state of existence.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that adaptability is vividly clear in the success stories. You have Gary Parkinson, a former English football player who suffered a stroke, but now works as a football scout, evaluating players purely by blinking his assessment.
Yeah, that's amazing.
You have Howard Wicks, who developed the condition as a teenager and founded his own charity. Martin Pistorius delivered a TED Talk using text-to-speech software. And Nick Chisholm, a New Zealand rugby player who suffered a brainstem stroke, went on to win the National Wheelchair Bodybuilding Championship 6 times.
These individuals demonstrate that when the mind is provided with the proper tools to interface with the world, it can transcend the physical limitations of the diving bell.
And the technology that allows them to do this has advanced light years beyond Bauby's ghostwriter reciting the alphabet. The sources talk about eye tracking and even sniffing technology, but I really want to understand how this actually operates mechanically. How does a camera turn a blink into a voice?
So, eye tracking systems utilize infrared light. The device shines a harmless infrared beam into the patient's eye, which creates a highly visible reflection on the pupil and cornea. A specialized camera tracks exactly where that reflection is pointing on a computer screen. The screen displays a grid of letters or commands. The patient simply looks at a letter, and by dwelling their gaze on it for a fraction of a second, the software registers it as a click.
So they can type out full sentences just by darting their eyes around a screen, and then text-to-speech software vocalizes it in real time.
Exactly. But the engineering goes even deeper for patients who lose even their eye movements. Researchers have developed device-controlling sniffing technology.
Let's break down that sniffing tech, because using breath as a joystick sounds like straight-up science fiction.
It relies on the subtle control we have over our soft palate, which is the muscular tissue at the back of the roof of the mouth. Even in states of profound paralysis, the cranial nerves controlling the soft palate often remain functional.
Really?
Yeah, so the technology involves a small, wearable sensor placed just inside the nasal cavity.
Like a tiny cannula.
Very similar. This sensor is a highly sensitive pressure transducer. When the patient sniffs in or puffs air out, it changes the air pressure inside the nasal cavity. The transducer measures those microfluctuations in pressure and converts them into an analog electrical signal.
So a sharp sniff creates a spike in the electrical current.
Yes, and a computer digitizes that signal. The software is trained to recognize patterns. A short sniff might act as a left mouse click, a long sniff might move a cursor, and an outward puff might act as a right click. It's essentially breathing in Morse code. It translates the biological act of respiration directly into digital interaction.
That is extraordinary. It means that even in cases of total immobility, where the physical cage is absolute, engineering can provide a back door out of the diving bell.
It returns agency. It transitions the patient from being a passive observer of their environment back to an active participant who can express complex thoughts, make decisions, and, create art.
It is an unbelievable journey we've gone on today. We started with the visceral terror of waking up completely paralyzed. We broke down the microscopic architecture of the brainstem, marveled at Alexandre Dumas predicting the condition a century early, and ended with micropressure sensors turning human breath into digital voices.
It is a stark reminder of the extreme fragility of our physical anatomy, contrasted against the almost indestructible nature of human consciousness.
The next time you find yourself feeling overwhelmed by a minor, trivial frustration, getting stuck in traffic, dealing with a slow Wi-Fi connection, or spilling your coffee, I want you to think of Jean-Dominique Bauby. Think of a man who found genuine, overwhelming joy in the mere memory of taking a warm bath. A man who refused to let his brilliant mind be silenced, meticulously dictating an entire literary legacy, 200,000 blinks at a time.
It dramatically recalibrates what we consider a limitation.
So we will leave you with this final thought to ponder. Imagine, just for a moment, that your physical body is entirely stripped away tomorrow. No voice, no hands, no movement, leaving only your racing mind to connect with the world through a single, exhausting muscle movement. If you are trapped in the diving bell, what is the one message, the one story, or the one profound passion you would spend 200,000 blinks to share?